Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Chandar Pattabhiram, Senior Vice President and CMO of Marketo. He describes himself as a marketer for life, which I certainly would share that sort of description. Chandar joined Marketo in 2014 after successful runs at high-tech companies like Badgeville and IBM Cast Iron. He was named CMO of Marketo last August, and he's championed what he calls engagement marketing, which we're going to talk about, in response to the changing balance of power between buyer and seller. We're also going to talk along the way about the importance of storytelling, measurement, and building a marketing tech stack that makes size for your business. So welcome, Chandar. It's great to have you on the show.
Great. It's wonderful. And thanks for the opportunity, Drew. I welcome the opportunity. I look forward to the conversation.
So 6 years ago, I actually had a conversation, really interesting conversation with John Miller, who at the time was CMO of Marketo. And we talked a lot about what at the time was the new world of content marketing and how Marketo became successful by, the headline was, drinking its own champagne. And for the listeners, we're really talking about how Marketo used Marketo to market Marketo, and which is not always the case, by the way. The brands that have a solution don't always use it and apply their wisdom themselves. But Marketo definitely did. And to me, that made John and Marketo renegade thinkers. So I'm curious, what would you say is renegade thinking in 2017, Chandar?
That's a great question. First of all, I really appreciated the history of Marketo and being the content marketing machine that we became over the years. But when I look at 2017 and beyond, it's that shift from marketing to engagement. It's that shift from talking at people to engaging with people at every step of the journey and doing this at scale. And the word I use for it is adaptive marketing. And what I mean by that is that there is this continuous loop of listen, learn, engage at every step of the customer's journey to ultimately drive the one metric that matters in today's world, which is lifetime value. And the word I use, adaptive, is kind of the Netflix example. Netflix is a great example of adaptive marketing because they don't market to you based on who you are. They market to you based on what you have done, and they adapt at every step of the journey. So case in point, me, 40-plus-year-old guy, if Netflix markets to me just for the first time based on who I am, it'll be crime and drama that they promote to me. But if they market to me based on my behavior, as they have done, you see a lot of romantic comedies in my recommendation screen because me and my wife are watching it at every step of the journey. So that's one example of adaptive marketing that brands are doing based on behavior at every step of the journey. And that the shift there is, rather than marketing to you based on segmentation or based on one message to a few, it's one message to every person based on their behavior, and doing it at every step of the journey to ultimately drive a continuous conversation rather than a campaign. So it's shift from campaign to conversations in an adaptive way.
Campaign to conversation. So I'm totally on board with lifetime value. I've seen companies drive themselves into the ground by simply focusing on acquisition and cost per acquisition and bringing in the wrong customers at the wrong price and then paying for it on all sorts of levels. And when I look at the Netflix example, which they're brilliant, and I love the fact that they serve up things that I'm interested in based on my past behavior. They have first-party data to work with. Right. Is there a way to do this adaptive marketing without first-party data?
That's difficult. I think the most powerful thing is first-party data because it's behavior-based data, right? And ultimately, when it comes to data and behavior-based marketing, the most powerful data that any company can own using engagement platforms like Marketo or other products is that first-party data. Now, the good news is that it's just not first-party data. And what companies are doing is combining this powerful first-party data, which is permissions-based data, with second-party and third-party data from other sources to ultimately get a holistic view of that customer from an interaction perspective and go try to do that behavior-based adaptive marketing to customers. So that would be the best combination of approaches when it comes to data, Drew.
And that makes sense. I'm with you there. One of the things that I try to do on the show is not freak out every small business. And when they hear things like first party data, second party data, third party data, they're thinking of this massive tech stack. Is this something that a smaller business could actually implement?
Any company that is a 5-person company with 1 person in marketing to an IBM, which is thousands of people in marketing, can follow the same paradigm of listen, learn, engage at scale to do this adaptive marketing. And you're right, words like first-party data, third-party data sound big, but ultimately it is knowing information about your buyer at every step of the journey and listening to it, learning from it, and engaging it. And the difference is this democratization of technology today that lets any company do it rather than just the large companies do it, and going from this concept of old-school marketing to new-school engagement.
It's amazing, and I love that democratization. That's such a great way of explaining this, and I think that there is some fear that if you haven't done it, you sort of, I can't do that, I don't have that, and then once they start, it really is about it's getting started on this way and recognizing that you do have an opportunity, and you probably could use this technology as a small business, perhaps more effectively and efficiently, at least than a big bureaucracy who would, struggle to, well, we got to clear this with the legal team, or we got to push this through, and it takes, 5 different approval steps to get a piece of content approved. I mean, a small business, in theory, should be able to take advantage of this really pretty quickly, right?
We have thousands of customers who are small businesses today who are adapting this approach that I talked about in terms of listen, learn, engage, and shifting from this old school marketing into this new school engagement at different sizes, just not large companies. So that's a great point that you make, Drew.
Okay. So I listened to an interview you did last year, and it was a wonderful surprise to hear a senior marketer at a marketing automation platform company talk more about storytelling than you did about data and optimization. Why is storytelling so important?
It's ironic you asked me that, and we at Marketo have stewarded the shift of marketing from a soft science to a programmatic science over the last 10 years and really make marketing a measurable science. But make no mistake, marketing is still the science of storytelling. The true roots of marketing lie in effective storytelling. Because ultimately, we as marketers, what we're trying to do is win the battle for the mind of the buyer, because people don't buy products, they buy stories, they buy emotional connections. And that's really what we're trying to do. And that's why storytelling is that great weapon, that it's the weapon of mass influence that we can do by authentic and effective stories to ultimately win the mind of the buyer and engage them for life, as I've talked about this concept of engagement. And the reason why it is more important today is, first of all, there is so much noise. So first of all, there's lots and lots of noise, and it's very difficult for brands to stay above the noise. Second, customers have lots and lots of choice, and they don't have to engage with you unless you really connect with them. And third, we're going to a world where technology might make technologists obsolete with artificial intelligence and all these different trends. So what technology cannot change they might change what I call the think jobs and the do jobs, but the feel jobs of building emotional connection and storytelling are the jobs of tomorrow that technology cannot change, and storytelling becomes the powerful weapon for every marketer to go master and become effective at.
So I'm totally with you on all of this, and you're preaching to the choir as far as I'm concerned about emotional connections and so forth. I'm curious what the story that Marketo is telling right now. If you were to write a narrative, what's that narrative that you're telling about Marketo?
Yeah, our story is simple, that we have shifted from a world where sellers had all the power to where buyers have all the power. Buyers are discovering anywhere from 66 to 90% of a buyer's journey is self-directed, even before a brand knows that the buyer is engaging with them. You couple that with customer expectations have fundamentally changed in terms of the levels of service that they expect. And customers have lots of choice and very low switching costs. In such a world, the good news for marketers is that they can become the stewards of driving customer engagement. But what they have to do is shift from the traditional styles of marketing to the new style of engagement and building continuous, meaningful, and relevant relationship at every step of the journey to ultimately drive more lifetime value. And that's the story we're telling. And the world that I refer to, we call it the engagement economy. And our promise is to help brands build long-term relationships in the engagement economy and ultimately grow revenue and lifetime value.
I love this topic of storytelling. In fact, I've really researched it tremendously, read any number of books, listened to a great course on storytelling, really studied the art of both storytelling and how brands tell stories. And one of the places that I think brands get hung up on is when they hear story, my story. Let me tell you about why I'm so great. And they want to talk about attributes and competitive advantage. And often story, you can't get there. And so how do you sort of help brands sort of get to stories that actually have that help them make emotional connections with brands?
It's a great question. I've always believed that, people buy candles from you not because they need candles, because they need light. And that's the first step, is starting outside in, which is inside out when it comes to storytelling. And you have to be outcome driven rather than product driven. And that's the big shift in marketing that one needs to have. And many times it's, I remind my own teams, because we get so enamored by our own products that those products are interesting, but customers don't care about products. They care about value, and they care about ultimately what it means to them. So number one, my kind of first guiding principle of storytelling is go from product driven to outcome driven or customer obsessed in this particular case. That's one. Second is any story, if you can recall, is memorable. And being epic and being memorable as opposed to being fact-based is an important guiding principle too. So if I told you, for example, Marketo processes 1 billion activities per day, per year, that's one data point for you. But if I told you the same thing, says Marketo processes more than 5 times what the Library of Congress holds, that's a little bit more epic for you, that you can remember that in that piece. And the third piece is you have to build connection on an individual basis and use authenticity as your kind of foundation fabric to go do that. And being authentic as a storyteller, as a brand, is extremely important. So that will be my 3 principles: be outcome driven, be epic, and be authentic, as kind of the 3 ways of telling better stories.
Well, that's a perfect place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what state of the art is right now and how you can use content to cut through, particularly when everybody is doing it. So stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
So we've been talking a little bit about storytelling, and but what's state of the art right now? Is there a brand out there that's using your platform that you think is just killing it with their content marketing?
Well, there's lots of great stories in the marketing nation. We have thousands of great customers. So if I kind of, Google Earth it and look at what have I defined by state of the art, I kind of first talked about this concept of adaptive marketing and truly do behavior-based marketing at every step of the journey to listen, learn, engage at scale. So that kind of be one tenet of state of the art. The second tenet of state of the art is, bring these channels together, these paid and owned channels that typically have been separate swim lanes, but kind of bring this together when you're driving continuous context across all these different channels. So the big aha is there is no concept of omni-channel marketing, but it's really what I call omni-channel, understanding for every person what the channel of choice is. So for example, Drew, you might like Facebook, I might like LinkedIn, some of us like email, but really understanding each user and bringing all these channels together would be kind of the second tenet. And the third and the most important tenet is that anything you do has to be measurable in a true, it's not engine room metrics in marketing such as, MQLs and SQLs, but really driving revenue, pipeline, and ultimately lifetime value, and driving those campaigns that ultimately are able to give that would be what I call state of the art. And there are a number of examples of that, and one such example I want to highlight is Aetna. And you think of Aetna as a large company in the healthcare space, but they're doing state of the art modern marketing based on the tenets that I've talked about. especially in their campaigns, what they call direct to employee. And ultimately, the altruistic goal is to deliver better healthcare to people. And you kind of take that altruistic goal and work downwards in terms of what digital campaigns can I create based on behavior, based on bringing these paid and owned channels together, and based on something that's driving true, tangible business ROI. For example, based on the Affordable Care Act and recent trends, they're able to use marketing engagement technologies like Marketo and combine and have a continuous experience across channels like LinkedIn, channels such as Facebook, different channels on one side, and then their own website, their own email, and bring those all together to ultimately market to these employees in a very personalized and effective way. And the net result of that is that they've got a 16x return on the spend that they have done. So they've spent about $500,000 on this conversations that they want to have. And I don't call it campaigns, I call it conversations. But that $500,000 spend has created a 16x return for them using this modern marketing techniques that I've highlighted. So that's a great examples of all these three tenets and how even a large company marketing to 28 different states, 24 different languages across the board, bringing all these things together in a very nimble, agile way.
It's a great example. 16x always sounds good. That's a big number, and I think just about any brand would get excited about that. I want to go back. You mentioned getting paid and owned to work together, and I think that's such an important point and probably a difference, frankly, from 6 years ago when you could just create great content and it would rise to the top and people would find it. But really, we're at the point where even if you create great content with great stories, you really need to give it some kind of a boost, right? I mean, it's just the notion of simply getting organic reach as a result of your social or your content is probably wishful thinking.
Yeah, totally. The way I evaluate effectiveness of content is a very simple two-way street intersection. I look at relevance as one street. I look at consumability as another street. And the best content is at the intersection of relevance and consumability. So you could have content that's very relevant today. For example, you could talk about GDPR in Britain, or you could talk about something that's very relevant today in the US. But if it's not consumable, people don't read it. On the other hand, you could have very consumable, fun content. But if you're talking about content that's not relevant today, you don't get the same adoption either. I could be talking about very readable VCR content in a Netflix world, just to give you an analogy, but that's not very, relevant. It'd be very consumable, very fun. So that's the intersection that we have to constantly use to evaluate, are we being relevant to the buyer? Not about products, but what they care about. And are we being consumable in terms of building connection, using the right combination of empathy, fun, humor, and all these different things to ultimately drive consumability up.
It's amazing that in some ways that marketing, the fundamentals of marketing have changed remarkably little since when I first got in the business at JWT. The creative director said, all right, every great ad has this: surprise, emotion, and relevance. Well, that's kind of what you just said, right? It's just funny that, in that sense.
We're back to the future, my friend. That's what
yes, we are. But it makes sense. I mean, it is this, it's got to be relevant, or it's a gorilla in a jockstrap. It's just, you got my attention, which is not that hard, but doing something doing it in a memorable way and doing it for a long time is hard. So, we talked a lot about how we get our content to be relevant. You mentioned the science, which, I've done this study on CMOs now and sort of narrowed the great ones down to sort of 4 characteristics, and these, the need for courage, having some artfulness in order to tell an emotional story, thoughtful in that they're part of this give to get economy. But the last one, and if the first 3 are great, they'll still fail if they don't have some science. And you would think in 2017 that all would have science, but it's in some cases they actually don't. Let's talk about, we talked about lifetime value, or how do we balance though this short-term revenue thing? I want to get, Aetna wanted to get some revenue. That's 16 times something, right? How do we get to this balance of, I want to get leads into the pipeline, and I need lifetime value?
Yeah, it's a great question. a lot of times science is kind of the bane of marketing. And what we're trying to do in the last 10 years, Marketo has helped a lot of marketers do is go from Rodney Dangerfield to Aretha Franklin and really get that serious RESPECT and really prove their value and get their seat at the table. But when it comes to metrics, I think here is where the shift is happening when it goes from old school marketing to new school engagement. You can look at your metrics. If I have to draw the Maslow's hierarchy, mental model of a Maslow's hierarchy of marketing metrics, I'll talk about what's at the food and shelter level and what's at the self-actualization level, just to use a metaphor here. Historically, even in attribution marketing, we've talked about, impressions, clicks and conversions, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, etc. Those things, especially the impressions, click conversions, and marketing qualified leads, are all what I call engine room metrics. Those are all metrics within marketing to gauge the status and progress of marketing in these different campaign activities that we're doing. And then the second set in that hierarchy, we kind of go up the proverbial triangle there, is what I call alignment metrics that are really important to align business organizations, especially the revenue teams of sales, marketing, service, etc., which to me is pipeline and revenue, which is number of opportunities created, what's the revenue, what's the pipeline. So when we have conversations with sales or any company between marketing and sales, they're not talking about leads, they're talking about what's pipeline and what's ultimately bookings. And then sitting at the top of all of that in the Maslow's hierarchy are strategic metrics for the organization, not just alignment metrics or engine room metrics. And I said there are two, which is, are you driving brand advocates in the organization that are going from attribution to amplification? People are really sitting on the rooftop and talking about your brand from an advocacy perspective. And two, are you driving lifetime value to your organization? So if you kind of look at your metrics in this way, you can think of it as a journey, and people start off in the lower end of that Maslow's hierarchy. But ultimately, what we all have to get to is creating more brand advocates and creating more lifetime value. Then our businesses invariably become naturally successful.
And, it's funny, if you put it, the great CMOs get out of the engine room.
They are.
They're out of the engine room, but a lot of folks in marketing never get out of that room.
That is true, and that's why, I've been saying that the Mufasa, if you take the Lion King analogy, I've said that, lifetime value is the Mufasa of all marketing metrics that we all want to go to. So that's my line. I'm sticking with it.
All right, fine. I could push you on that metaphor a little bit, but I'm not going to. You mentioned brand advocates, and that's a hot topic right now. Yeah. I know a lot of brands are struggling to do that. For your brand, for Marketo, do you have an advocate program, and how do you approach identifying and building a scalable advocacy program?
Yeah, I think we have 2 years ago. We've done a big shift in Marketo that even as Marketo as a company 2.5 years ago, we focused on acquisition marketing. But we've kind of looked at our marketing holistically across the life cycle, starting with acquisition marketing to adoption marketing to cross-sell marketing to ultimately advocacy marketing that I'm going to talk about. And it is a life cycle that you go through. And historically, spend has been in a lot of companies more on the acquisition side, but we've kind of shifted that spend curve, more balanced it, I would say, over the last couple of years. So when it comes to advocacy, here's kind of the first principles of our philosophy. Number one, never confuse customer loyalty with advocacy. A lot of times what we have is, we as consumers have loyal to a brand, but when we locked into the brand for airline, cable providers, etc., because of our contracts. So never to confuse locked-in loyalty with true brand advocacy that you're shouting from the rooftop. So that's principle one. Principle two is never assume a strong correlation between the most lucrative customers you have and your best brand advocates. And many times the brand advocates who go over the top for you to showcase their passion for the brand may not be the big dollar investment customers, but provide value in other ways. So that's kind of the first guiding principles. And then what we've looked at is the 1% rule. So I'm going to borrow the 1% rule that people have used in content and applying it to advocacy here. And what I mean by that is for our brand, I would say that there's the 99-1 rule, that 90% are lurkers, 9% are likers, and 1% are true lovers of a brand, who are shouting from the rooftop. Not only are they happy with their product, but they're ready to shout from the rooftops and engage in advocacy activities, whether that's customer references, media opportunities, case studies, online reviews, etc. And so what we do is, what are programmatic ways to kind of engage these people using new technology to make it easy for them, the first mile problem of showcasing their advocacy for our brand, and do it a lot easier. And we've had tremendous success through a program internally we call Purple Select, where we have actually quadrupled the number of advocates we have had over the last 1 year, using it in a programmatic rather than in an opportunistic way. The second and third and the most important point I'll make is advocacy always starts with employees. And every great brand is built inside out rather than outside in, because happy employees result in happy customers. And a great example of that is Walt Disney, right? I was at Disney World with my daughters, and there you can see their brand promise of the happiest place on earth is permeated across every employee, whether that's, the Pizza Hut pizza person or whether that's, a princess. And so that's what we have to do is we are doing at Marketo is having an employee engagement program, and actually I've hired somebody in marketing for employee engagement to ultimately drive happy employees that result in happy customers and build a brand inside out. So that would be my philosophy of advocacy that we've seen very good results here.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I want to wrap up just with what would you say is the toughest lesson that you've learned when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, the toughest lesson for me when it comes to marketing, I would say, is never to confuse effort with results. And a lot of times we do great stuff in marketing, whether running that ad campaign or throwing a party or running this product launch or creating this new messaging deck or driving a new messaging on the website or running an SEO campaign, etc. That involves a lot of great effort. But if the result is not there to justify the effort, the value is not there in the money that you've spent. And my toughest lesson learned is to be religious about understanding the metrics of it and really take the emotion out of the measurement and really measure value based on metrics rather than value based on effort.
That's a great place to summarize, and certainly one that its substance matters in this. And I'm going to you've done so many great insights. I'm going to do a quick 1-minute recap of some of the things that I learned from this episode. And I love the way you frame this: listen, learn, and engage. And so if you think about that and break that down, almost all of the rest of the conversation that we had started with this listen that assumes that you have your ear to the ground, not just in social media, but in any content, in any customer conversations with your customer service people. You're listening to that. As you are listening, you are learning. Well, learning is the implication is there's some testing going on. One of the reasons that lots and lots of companies use a Marketo is that it is so easy to A/B test your way to success with any kind of a content program. And then the last thing is what the word was not convert. Convert was there. It wasn't there. It was engage. And implicit in that word engagement is there's the rainbow, which is or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is that your customers will come on board, assuming you figure out exactly what engagement is for them. There are categories where they may not want to have a long conversation with you, but they will appreciate it. And I the one thing I would say on that is every time you think that you're in a dull category, I just want to remind you that it's only dull because you're looking at it that way. I had a conversation last week with a guy who sells doors, and we were talking about doors, and I said, that's such an interesting thing because doors are about opening opportunities, right? What's going to walk through that door? It's not about what's hanging on the things there, but it's about opening, and sometimes it's about closing them. But anyway, talking to you has been wonderful. I've gotten so much out of this, and I really appreciate having you on Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Thank you, Drew. It was my pleasure. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.